Hi, I'm Future Alicia. Welcome to another episode of Crypto Native. Today I'm getting a little technical and talking to developer Nader Dabit, who is currently at EdgeNode building out the infrastructure for the decentralized web. We talk about what it's like to be a developer in the space and breaking into the space. We talk about community and memes and some aspects of Web3 that really are exciting to Nader, and where he kind of sees this space going in the future. Be sure to check out the show notes for tutorials and links that of content that Nader has created. And if you appreciate the content, I would love for you to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hi Nader, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself? Thank you for having me on.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk to you because I saw a tweet that you posted maybe like 2 months ago now, maybe like a month and a half, about starting a podcast as a really great way to talk to people in an industry and just kind of get lots of experience and do something fun. And it was at a moment when and like very deep down, I wanted to start a podcast, but I didn't think that I didn't have any idea how to do it. I didn't know what I would talk about. I kind of felt like I was starting at zero and I really didn't know how to get to one. And then seeing your tweet, I kind of I parked it in the back of my mind, and like subconsciously I was thinking I have to start a podcast so I can just tell Nader that he inspired me to start this podcast, and then I can get him on as a guest. So thank you so much for being on Crypto
That is
Native.
an amazing story. I love it.
But I think that kind of speaks to your impact in general with your Twitter account. So your maybe if you just want to, actually, first I would just say that following you from when I was interested in kind of Jamstack and serverless websites is how I first came across your Twitter account and your content. And you are so generous and exceptional at creating really wonderful tutorials in the space, and I think also just like profiling lots of people in the space that might not otherwise get a platform, which I am very appreciative of. And when I saw that you moved to EdgeNode earlier this year, it was a really big signal for me. I think that people say one of those things is you should follow the talent, and especially the developer talent. And I know as well a while ago you tweeted about always kind of being early on technologies. And I'd love to know what is going on in your head when you're thinking this technology is the future, and then how did you end up thinking, okay, the decentralized web is the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the going back to the very beginning of some of the things that you mentioned, I kind of got my foot in the door as well by starting a podcast. Well, very early on, I was very not connected to the community, and I found that a lot of the people that were, people that I looked up to and stuff were people that ran podcasts. And I also was kind of wanting to start my own podcast, and I saw an opportunity and I started a podcast. And, going back to what you said, I was inviting people that to me were like really way out of my league in the sense of they're very accomplished and things like that. So I invited Charlie Cheever on, who is, I don't know, he's probably like a billionaire, and he's one of the people that started Quora, and he was one of the original people on the Facebook team, engineering team, someone I really look up to. I invited him on and he said yes. And that was like my very first or second episode. And that kind of led me to understand, give some people a platform. And it's often, a great way to meet people and build connections, but also just have an excuse for two people to get together and discuss. In our busy world, like just setting aside 30 minutes or an hour, it's often a hard thing to do. And it gives everyone an excuse to kind of do that, I think. But yeah, I mean, the space that is Web3, that is crypto, is very, I think, misunderstood maybe by people that haven't really dived into the technology behind it. And what I've also noticed is that a lot of developers that I kind of look up to and a lot of engineering talent has been going into this space over the last 6 months to a year or so. And I never really understood what was going on. I kind of looked at it purely from a speculative point for a long time. From 2015 or 2016, I've been dabbling in it like from an investment perspective. But I never really, as a developer, understood what was going on, mainly because I never really looked into it past the surface area. I kind of heard about smart contracts. I kind of understood the value proposition around being able to have some type of native payment layer that's built into the internet, but I never really dove into some of the things that were happening in the community and in the ecosystem. So early, I would say late 2020, early 2021, I was looking at the Graph protocol, which is one of the protocols that we work with at Edge and Node. And I realized that they were using GraphQL for their underlying infrastructure platform and for exposing the APIs to the developers. And GraphQL is something that we had been really investing in at AWS, and a lot of other big companies like Facebook were doing a lot of innovative stuff with GraphQL. So when I saw that, it kind of sparked my interest to kind of dive a little bit deeper. And I kind of was, introduced to the entire space by diving into the rabbit hole of the Graph protocol and realizing why it exists and the technology behind it and what it does. And then also looking at all the other similar projects in the ecosystem and then how everything kind of fits together and where crypto actually fits in. It's just kind of like it's a large piece, but it's also kind of like a small piece in the grand scheme of things. It's not about the money and the value proposition of the actual cryptocurrencies. It's more about, a lot of times, for the most part, the utility that it provides for these different protocols. So yeah, I mean, diving into the Graph protocol led me to dive into the entire Ethereum ecosystem, as well as a few other different blockchains that are out there. It introduced me to things like IPFS, as well as Filecoin, and a few other interesting projects out there, like things like Ceramic and CS Skynet and Near, and a few other interesting just projects. And I started kind of seeing like how these projects were playing into a newer and maybe improved version of kind of the internet as we know it. And to me, that was like extremely fascinating, but also extremely disruptive. And to me, in always really in the history of the internet, the most impactful things are these really extremely disruptive ideas that kind of come along. And a lot of times they're not quite crystal clear or apparent until it's almost like too late for people to kind of get in and maybe ride that wave. And I feel like this is one of those things that is starting to gain momentum and be one of those huge disruptive technologies that kind of fundamentally changes the way that applications are built. And from a developer perspective, it's extremely interesting to me. And that's kind of why I've shifted my career away from traditional web infrastructure with AWS to what is being built in this space, which is decentralized web infrastructure.
Yeah. And do you see any similarities between, or was that kind of bridge from the serverless space that you're in to the decentralized web? Did it feel like less of a leap because, there are, serverless in general is like a step removed from Web 2 in a lot of ways and almost like a halfway point. So, yeah.
So I think the interesting thing about a lot of these protocols that they do have similarities with serverless infrastructure, because if I want to use the Graph or if I want to use something like IPFS or Filecoin, there is software that is being run on these different nodes that are decentralized. And the software being run on those nodes is something that someone else has to manage, someone else has to kind of keep up with. All I have to do is get an endpoint and interact with the node. And that's kind of how serverless is. In serverless land, you have this really complex piece of software, this application that's being developed by a large team over an extended period of time. But when I want to use that service, all I need to do is have the API opened up to me, and I just need to basically send API calls to that managed service or that serverless service. And I don't really have to worry about what's going on underneath the hood. And I think a lot of these web infrastructure projects are providing similar services. So that to me was like the main similarity. As far as the similarity from me coming from a front end and full stack development background and then being able to build things in this new area. And for me, I'm focusing on kind of like smart contract development versus actual building out, a blockchain itself. the skills are pretty transferable in the sense of kind of like if you know one of the popular programming languages that is out there today, like TypeScript or JavaScript, or even a typed language, then Solidity isn't that hard to pick up. I think the main difference is understanding how the payment layer is actually programmed into the contract, which is something we've never had to deal with in the past. Typically,
Right.
what you deal with in the past is something like Stripe or PayPal that provides this, interface or some type of like API that you can interact with, or an SDK that you use in your project. But the complexities to even make that work a lot of times is far beyond what we're doing in this world, because with payments built into a smart contract, you actually have the ability to send money to the contract, deal with the money within the contract, and transfer money to different people from within the contract. And it's super it's awesome once you kind of start playing around with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just thinking about that move that maybe developers, if they're open to kind of blockchain and looking at the decentralized web, and they're coming from like a front end dev role or knowledge base, and then just this kind of awareness with Solidity devs and just like how in demand they are. And then also I saw in a tweet you mentioned Rust developers as well. So with the deficit of developers in this space, what does it, is there like a number in your head of like how many developers need to be attracted into this space, and how to kind of attract those people to like transferring their skills that they have or learning these languages from scratch? How do we go about that?
Yeah, I mean, there just seems to be a deficit in general of the entire marketplace, not just within this space, but in general. But I would say that especially in this space, there does seem to be a lack of engineering talent, mainly because I think that the amount of capital that's come into crypto and decentralized web in the last 12 months has allowed an uncountable number of projects to scale up extremely quickly. So when you go from having like $2 million in capital to having like $300 million in capital, or things like that, which you actually are seeing happening, then these teams are trying to kind of build out multiple teams at a time. And if you have this happening over the course of, a few months, like not a long period of time, but also throughout a bunch of different companies all at the same time. Meanwhile, you also have a lot of demand happening in the regular area. It's just, a lot of people want to build a lot of ideas out, and there just aren't enough people to do that. So, I mean, I think that someone shared some data with me today that was kind of showing how much more you might make in this space versus the traditional space. And I think it was like something like 15% more is kind of like the average, what you kind of see as far as job offers are concerned. But to me, the most interesting thing about the crypto space is the equity, because you can get equity at a startup, but the equity at a startup often isn't liquid for X number of years, and then often it's never liquid at all. You kind of are given 0.001% of the company, and they're like, oh, if we ever go public or if we ever get acquired, that'll be worth like $1 million or something. But that often never happens in a startup, or almost never happens. Now, in a FANG company like Microsoft or somewhere like that, then it's a lot more liquid, but you also have a lot less upside. Now, the stock price might go up like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5x even over the course of your time there, or maybe even a little bit more. But I think in the crypto space, you often see the price going up like 100x or even more. And I think that's a fun and exciting part of it too. If you're a developer, you're probably not going to want to bet your financial future on that. But even if it doesn't go up 100x, you still have that liquidity that you have that's given to you as part of most of the deals that are out there. And even if it goes down 50%, you still have the liquidity. Whereas if you were kind of in a startup, you really don't. So you come into this space, I would say try to get a really good base pay to just secure that weekly and monthly money coming in. But you're also often, for the most part, given some type of equity. And the equity is pretty cool,
Yeah, that's a really interesting consideration that I totally overlooked it and haven't thought about. So that's great to think about. And in terms of the difference between the Solidity and I guess maybe just like communities within crypto. So say like the Ethereum community, and with Rust you might have like Solana, compared to communities that you have been in previously, maybe around like AWS and serverless and front end. How does the experience like differ and stay the same between these communities?
Yeah, so I mean, the community that I was in before was like AWS,
Mm-hmm.
serverless, Jamstack, and I feel like it's a little bit more saturated with people that are out there doing talks and creating content around a lot of the same stuff. So, for instance, if I Google how to create a blog on the Jamstack,
Mm-hmm.
I will literally probably find like 500 articles. Now that is really great because a lot of people want to build a blog on the Jamstack. But if I'm in the Ethereum space, I will often search for something and never find the answer for it. So I
Right.
think there's a lot more there's a lot more people creating content and doing stuff like that in the traditional web space than in this space. And I think that is a huge opportunity for anyone that wants to come in and make a huge impact, because there's so many things that are still new or nascent. And also the technology is moving a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
So 6 months from now, there will be things that everyone wants to know that no one knows yet. And there will be people searching for something that isn't there yet. And I think it's just a lot more fast paced. Even though like the traditional web space is already fast paced, this space is a lot more fast paced. So I think therefore the community, um, there's I maybe think like there's less people in the community in general creating content. So like
Mm-hmm.
that would be one difference. Of course, there are people doing stuff, but I feel like there's just maybe less of a focus on creating community content, slightly less than in the traditional space. But as far as like the other parts of the community, most communities have a Discord where you
Mm-hmm.
can go in and chat, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of events. I feel like the people in this space are a little bit younger in general, so there's a lot of like people that are in their teens even, because I don't know, like there seems to be a lot easier, lower barrier to entry in this space. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're in like a Discord server and you're contributing and you're doing cool stuff, there's really nothing stopping a company from like bringing you on and hiring you or whatever. Even if you're like 18 and you don't have a traditional education, where I feel like it's a little bit tougher to maybe get that break in the traditional web space. Also, almost every company is remote. I
Mm-hmm.
really don't think I've ever run into a company that isn't remote actually in this space, whereas a lot of traditional web companies are still not remote. That's a great thing and that's a cool thing. The community seems to be a lot more internationalized than
Mm-hmm.
the traditional web space. So I think like you'll have actual companies that are created that have people working with them across the entire globe. Whereas I think a lot of traditional web companies are a little less likely to have that happen. So that's just a few things that stand out to me.
Yeah. And so, are there any conferences or events on your books over the next couple of months with things like just starting to open up in some places?
Yeah, so there's DevCon, which is coming up sometime soon, and DevCon is in Bogota, Colombia, and we're excited about that one. We're going to be going to that. There is ETHCC, which is in
Mm-hmm.
France, and it's one of the biggest Ethereum conferences, and we're going to be there giving workshops, having swag and stuff. There is a couple of other conferences that I can't remember the names of them. I think there's one in New York in September, and then there's one in December in Germany. But they're all starting to really, really come back. Yeah, everyone is. I think everyone's just ready to start traveling again, and with the
Mm-hmm.
global numbers of COVID starting to go down, and the vaccine rolling out, and people feeling more comfortable around other people, then everyone's starting to put on events. So I think
Yeah.
I think what is it, September? So in September I have two events. In October I have like four events. And December I have two events. In November I have like, one event already. And this is like these are events that all have sprung up over the last few weeks even, I think.
Wow. Yeah. And so, just in terms of building community, especially through content, because I guess that is a bat signal in some ways for people coming into the space, which is that you Google something, you try to find the answer, and you see, yeah, how many people have written about it, if people have written about it at all. And something I noticed that you are like really good at, and is definitely feels like a crypto thing is memeing and creating memes. I feel like developer memes also like hit a really like a really sweet spot, which is like you just so get it. It's so funny to like only a developer,
Yeah.
and so it's really easy to get engagement. But like I just saw you like tweeted a meme just the other day, and I think it got like 14,000 likes. And yeah, so like, how do you feel about like memeing in the crypto space and just like memeing to create community? Which, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like memes in the crypto space are a lot more popular, and they're just a lot more. You just see a lot more people be taking themselves a little less seriously.
Hmm.
Like people are completely open to just making fun of themselves and joking around with their friends, and I just feel like, yeah, you see people that are out here having a great time, and I think it actually is part of the how people are at actual work. Whereas like I think like everyone
Hmm.
that I've worked with is truly excited and happy to be working on this stuff, because I feel like the people that actually get it, that are here, that aren't in it for the money, that are kind of in it for the ideas that we're building out like a new improved version of almost like the internet, and we're kind of innovating and doing all this really exciting stuff. I think people are like happier. I mean, at least in my experience, compared to some of the jobs I've worked at in the past.
Hmm.
And I think maybe just being happy, people are more likely to joke around and not take themselves too seriously. I don't know. But yeah, memes seem to be a big thing. I mean, I shared that job posting from Gitcoin. They have
Yeah.
a posting for like $120,000 a year job for someone to create memes. And so I thought that was funny. And I think some of the accounts that I kind of like the most are the ones that are just like making jokes all the time. I mean, they'll share some valuable content as well, but for the most part, like you just feel like they're hilarious and funny people, and that's kind of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like
I
CEOs of companies are out there like joking around. It's fun.
yeah, it's definitely a from the top kind of attitude or vibe that is set, which is really novel, I think. It's almost like maybe I wonder in a traditional Web2 environment if you see if you see these memes and you're kind of like laughing quietly to yourself as opposed to like in public and engaging in ways where it's okay from a professional standpoint to engage with the memes. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so maybe just talking about this new decentralized web and parts of it that really you think are complete paradigm shifts that are really important to what's possible if we just kind of be a little bit naive and maybe optimistic for a second and think about a decentralized web for good actors. What are kind of some things that you're really excited about in that space?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of there are a lot of things that need to happen to kind of get to
Hmm.
the idea of what the future might look like. And I don't think it's going to happen overnight, and I don't even think it's going to happen, for every type of application, even maybe.
Hmm.
But I do think that you're already actually starting to see the disruption of certain types of applications that are happening. We're seeing kind of like the early stages of those types of apps being built and those things happening. And I think like the things that you need to look for are what is possible right now using this tech, and the people building out optimized versions of those types of applications. So for instance, what is a smart contract really good at? What is a blockchain really good for? And what is it not good for? So if I want to build out a private messaging app that has trillions of messages being written every day that needs to be like very low latency, then a blockchain is not a good application of that right now. And even a decentralized database that is that optimal, that is that optimized, that is that efficient isn't there right now. So you probably wouldn't
Hmm.
want to build that type of application. But what about a financial transaction that right now has to go through, Stripe's payment processing system, and it needs to come out of my bank account, and then it needs to kind of like go through all this security stuff, and then it transfers to another person, then it has to settle with their own security, and then it has to then settle within their own bank account. Now, how much code has been written to actually make that happen? I mean, it's a lot. I mean, you have multi-billion dollar companies that are built on top of just making that simple transaction happen. You even have trillion-dollar industries that are built just to facilitate that. You have the old banking system, and then you have layers on top of that. You could think of like Stripe and PayPal as like a layer 2 on top of the bank. And all of this infrastructure is needed just so I can send you a payment. And I think that the crypto part of Web3 and kind of just the introduction of native payments disrupts a lot of the traditional ways of finance that we've used to being seen. So for instance, e-commerce, I think e-commerce is a really great example for something that's going to be disrupted, soon. If I'm a company and I am paying Stripe 3% of all of my sales, and also, having to deal with all of the additional complexity around implementing that, why would I need to do that if there was a way that I didn't have to pay that 3%? And, with Ethereum and Bitcoin, it's still fairly expensive to write a transaction. But what you're starting to really see happen right now is these other layer 2s, as well as some of the improvements around Ethereum, start to actually happen. So Arbitrum, Polygon, and there is Optimism, I think is what it's called. Those are all like being used today. So Polygon is something I was actually just building on today. A transaction on Polygon is a fraction of a cent. So if I can now send a digital payment using something like this, then it makes so much more sense. And I can literally just send it to you, and I don't have to deal with all of these other things. So finance is definitely the first thing that's going to start becoming disrupted, in my opinion. So finance is going to be e-commerce, it's going to be banking, it's going to be lending, it's going to be all types of stuff. And you're seeing people program really sophisticated and complex things into smart contracts now. So you can basically do quite a bit already there. And I think the main thing holding it back right now is the gas costs. So with Ethereum, you start seeing the gas costs going up and down, and it really is kind of prohibitive to a lot of people. Why would you spend $5 or $50 to send a transaction like this? So a lot of the transactions that make sense have made sense up until now have been like high value transactions. That's why you see things like NFTs becoming popular, because it makes sense to maybe spend $20 for a transaction for a high value item like $20 or $30,000 or $1,000 or even $500. But it wouldn't make sense for a micro transaction for $5 or $10, right? So I think like with these layer 2s, they're offering that next evolution of payments where it will make sense for me to send $5 if it only costs me a fraction of a penny, right? So that's a new evolution of what's happening now with these improved layer 2s. The next thing that I think you're going to start seeing is people building out these traditional social media companies like Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram in a decentralized manner that allows native payments to go directly to the creators, as opposed to right now very complex ways of getting that payment to the creators. The one that no one likes is advertising. So what if you could basically come up with a new business model that doesn't have ads, and it's actually already being done? You already starting to see a few ideas coming out there. There's like a decentralized version of Twitter that allows you to kind of invest in different creators, and their value goes up and down. That's a really interesting take on it. I don't think that's going to be the final version, but when you see that glimpse of like the future, you kind of see like what this whole idea could be if it's done properly.
Yeah. So just talking about advertising, because it seems to be the bedrock of the internet as we know it, in terms of these platforms that we use, taking our identities and harvesting our attention and turning themselves into billion-dollar companies. How do you see identity changing? Because I think that, closely linked to the idea of advertising is that these platforms, they know so much about us and they know us so well. And I guess, because we use that kind of single sign-on with Facebook or Twitter or Google, and that identity follows us everywhere, they get a really broad picture of everything that we're doing on the internet. And so maybe I wonder if you could talk just about identity and how like using identities, plural, for an individual person might change with Web3.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a very fundamental idea, I think, in Web3. And I think that we've just gotten so used to how we think of identity, it's really hard to free the shackles of our mind from
Hmm.
like what identity even means. Like to us, identity is like, oh yeah, I'm gonna give this website my phone number and my name and my email address and all this other like data that they really don't need. But the reason that we often do that is a way for them to kind of keep up with and communicate with us and target us ultimately with advertising that they are going to make a lot of money off of. Now, they promise to be safe with our data and blah, 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 but of course, that's not the case. We see every single day almost some new data breach.
Hmm.
And if you've been on the internet for more than a couple of years, you've no doubt been a part of one.
Hmm.
And those people now have your password a lot of times if it's not stored properly. They have your all of your information, and now you start seeing people having their identity stolen, and now a lot of people just keep their identity locked with the credit unions because of how prolific it is. Um, so identity as we know it, I think, is completely going to be changed, and the idea of how we think about ourselves as a user on the internet is going to definitely change. So I think the main thing to look into here, and if you're interested in what this actually means, is this idea of self-sovereign identity,
Hmm.
meaning that we have an identity that we can choose to curate and keep up with all of the information around us, and we can carry that identity with us between applications. Now, how would this work in practice? And the idea sounds, interesting, but maybe kind of very, not very clear. Like, what does this even mean?
Hmm.
Well, today identity is tied to some unique piece of information about us. Now, that can be, for the most part, it's your email address, right? Like when you sign
Hmm.
up with the new app, they're using your email address. If you sign in with Google or Facebook, they're storing your email address. That's why if you go to a site and you're like, oh, did I sign up with email? Did I sign up with Facebook? I kind of forgot. And you authenticate with Google, they automatically are going to get your email address, and they're going to find if you already signed up. And then
Hmm.
therefore your unique identifier is your email address. This idea of a unique identifier is extremely important because it gives the application a globally unique way to identify you. There is only one person with your email address in the entire world, because no one else can create some name at gmail.com, because Google is the authority and they know how to handle a database that only
Hmm.
allows a single item to be stored with that ID. Now, how do you have a unique identifier for everyone on the internet and have them have their own control over it? Well, there is actually a Web3 specification for developers if they're familiar with Web3. I'm sorry, not Web3. I forgot the spec. Let me actually look it up.
Okay,
It's called. I
cool.
mean, I know it's called DIDS, but I forgot. Okay, I'm sorry, W3. So it
All
is
right.
kind of like very close to Web3. So the W3C has a specification called Decentralized Identifier. And this is a way for you to create and manage your own unique, globally unique identifier. Now, how do you actually tie that to a way to authenticate? Because again, the reason that a lot of these authentication mechanisms exist, like Google OAuth, is because authentication is inherently extremely complex.
Hmm.
And also signing a request, an API request, to make sure that the user is the one sending it is a very complex thing. And it's a problem that still hasn't 100%, in my opinion, been solved in software development. Even the teams at AWS that we used to work on had discussions around how we can improve that. So the really, really cool thing about the crypto ecosystem is that you have this idea of a wallet and a wallet address. And how do you actually get that wallet address? Well, it's done using public key cryptography. So, public key cryptography basically is this mechanism where you can generate a globally almost you could almost say it's going to be unique forever, because it's a private key that's generated using this algorithm that is so impossible to kind of have like two matching numbers, that the likelihood is less than the number of atoms in the entire universe. Like if you
Okay.
look at the algorithm, it's so like so like you have this idea, it's almost impossible to crack it, is the idea. So you have this SHA, I think it's SHA 256, I'm not positive, but anyway, you have this private key, and the private key is something that you can use to manage your identity, your wallet. And you can use this private key to send money, to sign transactions from your wallet. And using your private key, you can then determine a public key that other people can use to decode a transaction that you send from your wallet. And then using the public key, you can derive your address. So you come up with this private key. The public key is derived from the private key. The address is derived from the public key. And this way, if you have, as long as you have your private key, you can generate your public key and your address on any application. So you can basically take your identity from your MetaMask account into another wallet or whatever. So you have your private key, you have your public key, and you have your address. So when you want to send a transaction, you can basically sign the transaction with your private key. It generates this hash. You send the transaction along to some other endpoint along with your public key. And then the user that is decoding that transaction can use your public key to parse that transaction. And it's impossible essentially for anyone to kind of do that if they don't have your public key. So it's kind of a really nice, in my opinion, like authentication and authorization mechanism. So using this, you can do authentication and authorization and stuff like that. So it's kind of like built into Web3 using the crypto wallets. And now that you control your own private key, you can associate a decentralized identifier, the DID that I talked about earlier, with your wallet address. And then from there are starting to be protocols that are built that allow you to go in and set metadata that correspond to that decentralized identifier. So let's say I have this decentralized identifier that's tied to my wallet address. What if I want to start using a bunch of social media apps and I do want to expose my own real name? I can decide to do that, or I can decide not to do that. It's kind of completely up to me. You can also have multiple addresses. You might have one address that you use for financial transactions that you want to keep anonymous. You might have one address that you want to associate your name with for social media or whatever, or you might not. It's completely up to you. But the only way that metadata can be changed is if you make that operation happen yourself. No one else in the entire world can do that. So that's a huge difference than what we have today, whereas like anyone that holds the data in the database can go and make that change, and they can also, have control over it. And that was a lot, and I probably, went on too long of a field.
No, I think that wallets are such a fundamental part of the crypto experience, and that, myself especially, I didn't really have a good understanding of how all of the pieces kind of connected together. And I think it is such a huge innovation, this ability for authorization to take place in that way, and to not be at, I guess, like the mercy of whoever controls the database. I saw that you just released a project, like a repo about an Ethereum single sign-on and so mechanism. So maybe can you just like run us through that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, someone had sent out a tweet that went semi-viral about Ethereum single sign-on. And it was exactly kind of describing the entire conversation, I would say, that me and you just had.
Yeah.
And it was really cool because I think the way that person described what Ethereum sign-on is like already doing was in a way that was very crisp and understandable for the average user, the average internet user. So I thought that was like really great because I think a lot of times we get into the weeds of all the technical implementations and stuff, and we kind of make it sound a lot more complex than the actual user experience is. And I think that person made it really easy to understand. So I think that after I saw that, we had already been investigating a bunch of different ways to implement identity management in Web3 at Edge and Node. We have researchers that work full time that kind of dive into all the different pieces, but we're also building out a couple of apps ourselves. And the apps that we're building, we need a way to do identity management. And the two different ways that we've been looking at are using Ceramic and IDX. And Ceramic is a protocol, and IDX is kind of a way to use the protocol to deal with identity. And then there is Skynet from SIA, and they have something called MySky, which is kind of another way to do identity. So those are the two that we're kind of looking at investigating at Edge and Node. But after I saw that tweet, I was like already kind of working on an example project. And I thought it would be really cool just to actually build out an app that showed people how to use this. And what I did was basically write all the code both on the front end and the actual interacting with the back end or the node, the decentralized node, the decentralized network, to kind of show how you might use this in practice to set a traditional like profile. So like when we think of a profile, we often think of like our name, our email address, our phone number. Of course, in Web3, you typically don't want to share maybe your email address and those sorts of things unless you want to. Of course, it's up to you. But like the idea though is like you have this profile where you can manage your information. Now, a lot of people on Web3 have like these pseudonyms. So your name could be a pseudonym. It could just be whatever you want. But you're associating your wallet address with this. And then any application that follows the specification that interacts with IDX and Ceramic can now use that information that you control. So let's say you sign up with 10 different apps and they're all using Ceramic. They're all going to have and be able to query for that metadata, but none of them can go and change it. They can only query for it. Right. You as the owner can have the rights to change that. So let's say you get married and you change your last name or whatever. You want to change that information across all of these applications. It's actually super easy. You just go in, you sign in, you change that metadata, and you save it, and now it's been saved across all of these apps. To me, it just makes a lot more sense that way anyway. But yeah, it was just kind of an implementation of that. And one of the things that I'm actually working on right now is to kind of like take that app and improve it a little bit, the UI and stuff, and launch it on a public domain to allow anyone to kind of go ahead and start getting started with their decentralized identity. And that way, like all you have to do is just go to this URL and you can go ahead and set whatever information you want just to kind of get an experience of how, or get like a taste of how the experience is, for future understanding, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would be a really useful exercise to walk through, like setting your decentralized identity up. And just this idea of things getting a bit technical, and I think it's interesting to see on Twitter because, there is like a complete range of so many spectrums on crypto Twitter. And so these ideas that come up from people, I wonder, like, with the things that you're working on and just kind of pulling threads and following your curiosity, how much of it are you kind of like looking at the sentiment on crypto Twitter and things like that? Or are you just like following the tech? Like, how do you pick which direction to head in?
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of, now that I'm in the industry, I'm able to kind of, I would say, hone in on different conversations, and I'm aware of more communities, and I'm able to listen to see like where things are going. And I usually use like a combination of my intuition around like where I think things are going, along with the things that people are interested in the developer community, because that often is a big signal for me. And then I kind of combine that maybe with like me as a developer. I want to be able to actually accomplish X thing. How am I going to be able to do that? Oh, this tool is already out there and someone's building a way for me to do that. So that's the only one that's out there. It's obviously like the one I probably want to try out. So kind of like a combination of like me wanting to build something and finding the things that are out there, along with where I think the innovation is happening. So for me right now, some of the things that I'm super interested in addition, of course, to like the Graph protocol, I'm really interested in these layer twos like Polygon and Arbitrum and Optimism. Right now, I think what I'm going to be building out is a project that shows you how to kind of build out a full stack application, deploy it to Polygon and interact with it, and create transactions and kind of see how much that gas costs is a lot less and stuff like that. I want to dive into Near and understand Near a little bit more as well. A lot of people on my team are excited about Near as well. And then I also hear that Polkadot seems to be kind of interesting. I don't know enough about it, but what I do know about it seems kind of interesting to me. So, all of that. But I think the things that interest me the most are anything that allow me as a developer to build out web infrastructure in the traditional way, in the decentralized web.
With Edge and Node, I heard you mention on another podcast that you were on just the other day, which I will link in the notes as well, that you guys have Everest.link, which is kind of like a curated repository of all of the projects in the space. And just when you were talking about how you go about solving a problem and building something and seeing what else is out there, can you maybe talk about this, how the decentralized web takes this open source ethos to just another level, and it goes from, code at an infrastructure level being a public good and kind of that, so many people use, but now it's like open source across the board. How does that change, how you experience this space as a developer?
Yeah, I think that it is really exciting to see kind of the differences, between what I've been working on versus what I'm working on now. But like the really cool thing about a lot of this data that's being stored on chain is that it is all public data, meaning that anyone can use it and anyone can, query for it and display it in their app. Some of the more interesting things that I think are going to happen in the future are going to be people that combine data together to build out new experiences on top of existing data. Also, people leveraging other people's smart contracts to build out their own applications, because if a smart contract is the value proposition for an application, a lot of work is done, but anyone can actually send a transaction to any smart contract. So just because I launched my own app, the smart contract is still there, so anyone can basically build out another UI on top of it. So I think that's really way different and fundamentally different than what I'm used to. So you have, open source software, but now we have open data as well. So all of the data on the blockchain can be queried by anyone. Using something like the graph, you can basically build out an API that combines multiple smart contract data into a single API endpoint and query for that. You can, of course, build your own, front ends directly on top of a smart contract with or without the graph. So yeah, I think the idea that not only is the software open, but the data is open as well is definitely different than what I'm used to.
Yeah, and how does that kind of change the idea of competitiveness, and kind of competitiveness between entities or individuals or organizations, and kind of weighing that on the other side versus progress and innovation?
Yeah, I think that you see, at least in my experience so far, a lot more collaboration versus what I'm kind of used to maybe in other areas. So everyone wants to collaborate and help out and kind of be a part of each other's projects, and everyone's like super friendly. Like if I see someone doing something interesting, I feel very comfortable like reaching out to them and trying to just talk to them and feeling like, we can work together and do something together. And I think you see that happening, I guess, in the Web2 world with individuals all the time, but I think you see this happening more with actual companies. So like you see multiple companies getting together and working together versus I think in a lot of the Web2 space, you see a lot more competitiveness. So I think that I really like the collaborative perspective that you see in this space for sure.
Yeah. And so just building on that, something I like to now round the podcast out with is if you could maybe tell me about a time or an experience you had or witnessed where you thought it made you really optimistic about the decentralized web, and you kind of felt like something clicked and this, made it all really clear for you that this is the future?
Yeah, I mean, for 10 years I've been in this space, and I think I've investigated so many different areas. And when I make a decision with my career, it's usually, I take it pretty seriously. So like early on, I was just kind of getting started. I didn't know what was going on, honestly. So I was just like learning everything I could. But I definitely noticed a need at one point with mobile. Obviously, mobile was starting to become huge, and this was like 10 years ago. I was always interested in how I could build mobile apps. I wasn't an iOS engineer, an Android engineer. I was a JavaScript developer. So I think like at that time, jQuery mobile was a great way for me to get in there. And then React Native came out, and I immediately knew that React Native was for me because it allowed me to build real mobile apps in JavaScript. Cloud computing was something I was always interested in, but the barrier to entry was a little bit high. And when serverless came around, I realized that that was a really great opportunity for me as a front-end developer to be able to kind of leverage more managed infrastructure that allows me to be very, very productive and be able to build real apps without having to understand and build out all the underlying infrastructure. So like my progression has been regular web development to mobile development to cloud. And then I kind of had a similar moment when I was investigating this space, because I kind of see a lot of the stagnation that's happening in the Web 2 space. People are now just reinventing the exact same ideas over and over and over. You have one social media platform being taken over by the same exact social media platform doing the exact same thing, with maybe like a slight difference, So like TikTok, for example, is just kind of an iteration on a version that was there earlier. And then in the web space, like the Jamstack space, you see like 17,000 different CMSs that are out there. And then it's like, to me, the innovation isn't that exciting.
Yeah.
So I feel like there wasn't a big watershed moment in the last few years for something that was like truly, truly disruptive. And I think like when I realized the potential disruption for not only the financial institutions and stuff with native payments, but also the ideas for rebuilding applications with the properties that are kind of part of like the Web3 ethos around self-sovereign identity and things like that. And I kind of see all of the massive potential there. Yeah, I kind of had a similar moment for wanting to get into this space in some way or another, like immediately. And I have to say, like, yeah, I mean, everyone that I've worked with so far and met with has had similar energy. I think a lot of the people that are in this space are kind of in it for the long run, and they're truly excited about the things that we're building. And that's kind of the thing that I like the most about it. But like, yeah, I mean, was there a moment? Yeah, there was definitely a moment. And it kind of really had to do with me understanding where a lot of these projects are ultimately headed. And then also seeing all of the engineering talent that was here. It's wild. Like, the level of excellence of like the people that I work with is far higher than any experience I've ever had. There's really smart people solving really, really interesting problems. And that tells me a lot. I mean, people here aren't just doing it because they have like golden handcuffs. The people here are doing it because they're truly believing in and excited about the work. And when you have engineers that are extremely smart doing stuff that they really believe in, it's just a really powerful synergy that really, I think, is a smart place to bet if you want to spend some time as a developer working in, like, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, that I think that idea of self-sovereignty and kind of sovereignty in general, and people taking, well, first of all, being aware of the different ways that you might possess power, like we talked about with your online identity, and then just, having an awareness, maybe more of an awareness around financial instruments and things like that, the decentralized web, the UX isn't there right at the moment for you to bypass that understanding. You really have to go through the thick of it and kind of internalize those things. But at the moment, I almost think it's for the better, because then it kind of activates a lot of intrinsic motivators.
There's a lot of work being done to kind of build out really interesting and improved user experiences. And I think that's a huge thing that is, I think you'll have that one killer app at some point that is going to onboard a massive, next level of adoption. And I think like something we haven't really talked about is that the Web3 space is tailor-made. It's perfect for the creator economy. And everyone is becoming a creator. Like, really, you're starting to see this massive explosion of influencers, but also just creators in every space. And this facilitates the creator economy so much better than the old way of doing things. And it just offers a much improved version of that. And I think that is another reason why you would be optimistic about this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's kind of fundamentally redefining this idea of work and maybe how we think about work as predominantly employees, to going to like more of that creator mindset, because I suppose you've seen it even with content creation in the developer space. You are you're a creator, in all sense of the word, irrespective of kind of the day job developing that you do. And so, yeah, that's really an interesting observation.
Yeah, I think it's like I was watching a futurist named Gerd Leonard like 8 or 9 years ago.
Okay.
And he's like a really interesting person to listen to. He has some really wild things to say, but if you actually listen to some of the predictions that he has, he's wildly like off on some of them, but for the most part, he's actually pretty spot on. And I think it's really wild for me to kind of go back and think about like 8 or 9 years ago. He was really kind of focusing on talking about how important entertainment is going to be in the future of the economy and the world. And I think you're starting to see the proliferation of entertainment into everyone's day-to-day lives in the form of a lot of the content that we're consuming. Back then it wasn't, as feasible as it is today for someone to just become famous on YouTube or TikTok or something like that. But it happens like every day now, and it's all kind of around this idea of entertainment. And I think the next step is how do we actually facilitate, payments and support of entertainers and things like that through direct ways that kind of bypass a lot of the old advertising models that we're seeing today.
Yeah. And do you think, are you optimistic that that's possible, kind of getting out of that advertiser mindset where maybe a bunch of consumers don't feel very attached to their data or their identity, and they're fine kind of to give it away in exchange for entertainment, and kind of changing that relationship that people have so that creators are able to generate an income and monetize their work in a way that consumers can also get on board with?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be kind of both of those things living at the same time for a certain time being. I don't think you're going to see like a new Web3 application that comes out and just like puts these other platforms out of business. And what I actually think is going to happen is someone's going to finally nail the user experience and all of the other things that need to happen to make one of these platforms actually work. And they're going to start onboarding users, and it's going to be kind of like, like quote unquote the first killer social media app. And it's going to kind of, I think, happen over time. And then you're going to start seeing probably people become wildly maybe more successful in the sense of kind of like financially successful than they would have been able to do on one of these other platforms. And when that happens, I think that's going to be when you see the major paradigm shift happen. Now, if that's going to happen in a year or 5 years, I don't think anyone knows. But I think that's ultimately where all this is headed. It just doesn't make a lot of sense for us to be all banking on these different currencies and us to have all these abstractions that happen in between the person sending the payments and the person receiving the payments, and how the advertising industry is there sucking out money from all these different places. Yeah, it just I think like all of these things are going to be fundamentally like rethought how this actually goes into building an app. And I think like the first one is going to be some killer social media app, and it's going to start off fairly slow, and then it's going to just kind of explode, in my opinion. And then that's going to be kind of where this whole idea, where one of these applications like steps onto the scene and starts gaining real adoption. And that will be kind of like the next phase of what we'll see happen in the future. That's just my prediction.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, I think predictions, especially from a developer, hit different. And so, yeah, because you can see things in the space that maybe just a user or a participant obviously doesn't have the foresight to see or predict. So yeah, thank you so much, Nader. And I would love for people to go and follow you on Twitter. You're also one of my favorite Twitter follows, and I really appreciate how candid you are. And so many times I feel like you tweet what I am thinking or have thought about, or you make me think about something, which I really appreciate. And yeah, just being constantly a platform to showcase people in the dev community. I think that's so wonderful. So your Twitter handle is?
Yeah, Dabit 3, DABIT, and the number 3.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you so much. It was really, really cool to talk to you, and I really enjoyed it. So I will be looking forward to seeing you around on social media.
Yeah, absolutely.